Well, welcome everyone. I have 5:02, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure people will filter in as we go. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for attending. My name is Jorgen Rose. I'm with Practical Farmers of Iowa. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully it's as rainy where you all are as it is here. I know if you're in Iowa, we badly needed it. So I just want to start off by talking a little bit about some of the most common types of habitat that we have here in Iowa. So 5 years, that's how long it takes a prairie planting to start to resemble something that doesn't just look like weeds. An oak, one of the most important food sources in Iowa's woods, doesn't even really start producing acorns until it's almost 20 years old. And the production of acorns doesn't peak until that oak is between 50 and 80 years old. The oldest oaks in Iowa are estimated to be almost 400 years old. So that's predates pre-European settlement of Iowa by almost 200 years. And it took almost 10,000 years for the native tallgrass prairies and oak savannas to build Iowa's best in the world soils. So my point here is that habitat management, habitat restoration is a long-term game. And there are things we can do in the short term that have immediate and beneficial impacts. But today we're going to hear some more about some of those long-term conservation strategies for farmers and landowners. So we're broadcasting live today from a couple of places: the office of farmer and landowner Jeff Puddens near Jefferson, and the office of U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist Darrick Weissenfluh way up near Union Slough Fish and Wildlife area in northern Iowa. And I'm going to let Jeff and Darrick introduce themselves here in just a minute, but I want to thank them up front for their time and expertise this afternoon. Before we get to the good stuff and hear from Darrick and Jeff about strategies for long-term habitat management and land protection, I need to do just a few acknowledgments and take care of some housekeeping. So first off, this work is supported by a variety of funders and sponsors. So this work is supported by a Conservation Innovation Grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So here's my contractually required disclaimer, as always, for your reading pleasure. This work is also supported by the McKnight Foundation and by the Ceres Trust. We also could not put on all these field days free of charge and open to you all without support from all of our great field day sponsors. So here are our A-level sponsors. I want to thank them for their support of our over 60 virtual field days that Practical Farmers has put on this season. And here are some of our B-level sponsors. So again, I just want to thank all these sponsors for their support. A little bit about Practical Farmers of Iowa. PFI is a farmer member organization, which means that our farmers set our priorities and point us where they want to go. And we achieve our mission of equipping farmers to build resilient farms and communities in many ways, most notably through on-farm research and by empowering farmers to connect and share knowledge. So virtual field days like this one are just one of the many ways that we work to make connections, share knowledge, and build community. And you can learn more about the many other great things we do, and you can learn more about becoming a PFI member and all of the associated benefits on our website, practicalfarmers.org. Just a little bit about today's field day. So here very shortly, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff and Darrick, and we'll plan on wrapping up around 5:30 or so. We may be a little early, maybe a little later. If there's good discussion, we'll just kind of play it by ear. For Q&A, we'll take clarifying questions throughout. So if you have a question that comes up, feel free to type it into the Zoom chat. We will relay those to Jeff and Darrick so that they can answer them. If they come up, definitely type those into the chat as well, but we might hold on to them until we get to Q&A time or until a more appropriate time. So if you type a question and we don't get to it right away, don't worry, we have not forgot about you. We will do our very best to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered. Also, when you exit Zoom this afternoon, you're going to get a prompt to fill out an evaluation. Please take a few minutes and tell us how we did. So it's not an understatement for me to say that we read and value every survey response we get back, and that those evaluations really help us make our programming better and more relevant for you all. So please take a few minutes and fill out that evaluation. This is just a little diagram of what you should be seeing in Zoom. So to type a question, you can use the chat box. Oops. To type a question, you can use the Zoom chat box. Please do make sure that this blue to box here does say to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your question. And feel free to type a question at any time. You can also use this raise hand button. If you want to ask your question verbally, raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question verbally during Q&A. But otherwise, feel free to chat any questions into the chat box, and we will also be posting links to various resources as we talk about them as well. So with that, I think I'm going to turn things over to Darrick and Jeff. Get Darrick's slides pulled up here.
All right, Jordan, can you hear me all right?
Yep, looks good, sounds good.
Okay, good deal. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Darrick Weissenfluh. I'm a fish and wildlife biologist stationed out of Kasuth County, but cover the Des Moines lobe and all adjacent counties. Jeff, you want to give a quick introduction on yourself?
Hold on, Jeff, you're muted. There you go.
There.
Start over.
Still there?
Yep, you're here now. We can hear you. Start over.
All right. Yes, I'm Jeff Pudens with my wife Nancy. We are farmers in the Sheridan Breda area, little local community. We've been involved in conservation since the early 70s, and we had a chance to purchase this property that I knew about and practice what we preach.
Perfect. And we're excited to talk to you today a little bit about, as Jordan already mentioned, some of the short-term management stuff that we've been involved in, or I've been involved in with Jeff and Nancy, and then move the discussion more into the long-term habitat management and protection realm. And again, make this more of a conversation, but hopefully provide some useful resources as we move along here in the discussion, and some closing points from Jeff and myself on the importance of habitat management and protection, and then give everyone some time for more questions and discussion at the end. So we're going to move through these first couple slides fairly quickly because they were part of our previous two talks when we talked about oxbow restoration and beaver dam analog installation. And so just to kind of top off what Jeff just said, he's located in Greene County, and he's part of the Cedar Creek watershed. And if you look on the map here, the star is approximate location of his property on the left. And Cedar Creek here, which is the tributary here, flows into the North Raccoon River, which is the bend you see down below the star. And Jeff, we're going to talk quite a bit more. We're going to show a video here in a minute. But Jeff has a pretty diverse property, at least from my standpoint, as a fish and wildlife biologist. And he's done a lot of work, as him and Nancy have done a lot of work, as he's already mentioned. The property here sits again on Cedar Creek, which, if you're looking at the map on the right, is the main creek you see here. It has what we thought was an unnamed tributary, and Jeff can share in a moment here what we just found out, but it actually does have a historical name to it. And he's got oak woodland on the south of the creek here, the unnamed tributary or the tributary. Oak savanna on the north side. He's got a number of what were crop fields that'll be planted into pollinator habitat here in the coming year or two, as well as 2 oxbows that we talked about previously, and some beaver habitat that we've created in this tributary here. And maybe first of all, I should have started with this little chunk up here is a native tree planting that he had done, and we talked about that in greater length back in January at our Practical Farmers of Iowa talk. So you can learn more about that there. So I will keep things moving and kind of move into our short-term habitat management. So a lot of words on the screen here. And again, we've talked about oxbow restoration and some of the stream work that Fish and Wildlife has done. I guess I just want to mention that I want to talk here briefly about more of the short term, and what I'm talking about is the 10 years time frame, 10 to 20 year time frame, and then we'll move into a much longer term time frame after that. But our mission of our Fish and Wildlife Service, the agency I work with, is to work with others, such as Jeff and Nancy and other private landowners and government agencies, to conserve and protect fish wildlife habitat for the continuing benefit of the American people. And of course, our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program is really geared towards the private landowner. And so for Jeff and Nancy, I've been the liaison for the Fish and Wildlife Service to do the in-field on private land type of work, and providing financial assistance as well as really the technical assistance to conserve our trust resources, such as the Topeka shiner you see in the upper right. Northern long-eared bat would be the species in the lower right. So I just wanted to kind of share how our agreements work for folks that are interested after hearing the other talks and this one, and kind of thinking about short-term management is, Jeff originally reached out to one of my colleagues who put me in contact with Jeff. And so our first thing with landowners is to do a site evaluation. It's been a little more difficult with the pandemic, but generally that is a in-person site visit. And getting to know the property and the landowners and what the goals are from the landowner's perspective. And then our program helps with the design to achieve that objective and all the compliance that would be required anytime there's federal assistance. And that includes state and local permits as well. And then the construction oversight. So, in the case of the oxbow restorations we talked about previously, we provided oversight with the contractor to help see those through. In addition to the help we got from NRCS, who was involved in that project as well. And then looking at the projects with the landowners that we complete, making sure things look good at completion, and really talking about the ongoing technical assistance and the management actions that need to be done for the remainder of our agreement and that short-term habitat time frame, which again is usually that 10 to 20 year time frame. And what that looks like for the landowner, and Jeff chime in anytime here, but Jeff essentially, his responsibility and Nancy's as the landowner is to review a landowner agreement that I put together to basically capture in writing what the scope and responsibilities of the project are going to be. It's at a minimum a 10-year agreement for our program, but can be longer. And it outlines the cost share that we're providing and that the landowner's providing. So that could be cash dollars, or it could be in-kind contributions such as labor from the landowner or myself, those types of things. And then any habitat maintenance requirements that are required, such as prescribed burning is a common one for prairie restoration, and even for wetland restorations, and any other habitat maintenance requirements that need to be done as part of that agreement for the term of the agreement. Jeff, is there anything you want to chime in with on the landowner agreement side that you found, easy or difficult when working with us?
Oh, Darrick, you always make it easy. There's a lot of obstacles out here to get anything done. And Darrick makes it very easy, gets the permits for you and that. Make sure that you're both on the same page when you talk with Darrick and when you have these landowner agreements. Look through them, make sure it's everything you agree to, because it'll be 10 years plus. And you want to make sure that this is something that you want to do on your land in the long-term future. But I would say, if you have a question, make sure you write it down so that you get an answer before you sign these agreements.
Yeah, good points, Jeff. And I'll just add that, from our initial site visit all the way through the process of the agreement, and honestly, quite a ways beyond, of course, as we talk long-term management, Jeff, Nancy, and I were initially and still are just always reevaluating and making sure we're on the same page with our projects and connecting on the expectations for each party. And that's really what the agreement does, is formalizes those expectations. So, if it's money or if it's labor, it's trying to make sure those things are part of that agreement so that we are getting the habitat benefits that we want over the course of that agreement, which is, of course, what the landowner wants at the end of the day as well. So we do try to keep these simple. They're usually only a few pages, but they are an important part of the short-term management to make sure we can get our financial resources as well as our time in the right places for the landowner to get what they want out of the project. So I will move on, and we're kind of going to shift here and not spend too much time on the short-term management because we talked about those in our previous talks, kind of shift more into the long-term vision and management and even protection of this property from Jeff and Nancy's point of view, as well as Jorgen with PFI will chime in on his knowledge of long-term options. And so bear with me for a minute. I'm going to pull up a video, but this photo you see here is a drone photo of Jeff's property and that unnamed tributary, and then his oak forest he's got on the right-hand side, savanna, which would be on the left-hand side as you're looking at the screen here. And there's an oxbow you can barely see down towards here, and we'll get a good view of this property as we're kind of talking through Jeff's long-term vision. So Jeff, maybe while I pull this up, if you wouldn't mind just kind of starting the conversation on, why you bought the property and again, what your vision is or your management goals are in the long term for this property.
Well, first I want to tell you guys that slow and steady wins the race. Think before you do, and then think again. A lot of what you're in control of or what you own has been there for thousands of years, and when we're talking trees, we're hundreds of years. So before you chainsaw something down or you change something, think about it, because what you destroy in 10 minutes, it may take 100 years to replace. Now that I've scared you, there's not much that Mother Nature won't restore no matter what you do to it. Our goals, our long-term goals our goals, I should say, was first to restore everything we could. Stop the erosion, hold wildlife, and then to educate so that we can preserve this for the future and people understand the importance of it. Trees have been there for a long time and they have a purpose. That unnamed tributary, a lady passed away this year that was a neighbor of ours, and she was kind of a historian. And just the other day, her son came to me and gave me a bunch of maps about the history of that. And in the 1800s, that was called Wolf Hollow. So the creek that we were always going to name, we found out already has a name. We have worked quite a lot on baby steps. Like Darrick says, we're going to put CP 42 in, CP 25, working on putting a pond in. We discovered a fen. Of course, that fen's only been there for 200,000 years, but now I know what it is. That about sums it up as far as I can think. We're in the Forest Reserve Program. We try to find out what's available for NRCS before you do anything. And the word is before, because once you've done it, there's no money for it. But you go to the NRCS, no matter how crazy your idea is, find out if there's money for it or find out the proper way of doing it. Think before you move. And then they'll come up with ideas you never thought of either. Like Darrick come up with this beaver analogs. I seen tons of dirt coming down this creek every spring. And I had an idea of, like I always do, think big and put a dam up and dam the whole works. Well, he says, let's put these beaver analogs in. It helps with the Topeka shiner. It helps with the environment, and it holds dirt. And it did hold dirt. I don't know, Darrick, remember how much dirt we figured that first year? It was quite a bit.
Yeah, they've been very impressive from that standpoint. And I think, your point there, Jeff, is, be willing to try new things, maybe even unconventional things, if they make sense and there's a good, potential for achieving their actual goals. And in that case, it seems to be working the way we both would like it to, which is a great benefit.
Think out of the box, and a lot of times you may not realize what you have. There's always something there that you have that nobody else has. Accent that.
I just froze the image here, Jeff, so I assume you guys have been able to see the video. But just looking here, you can see the Cedar Creek here in the forefront, and the oxbow that was recently restored with NRCS EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. here right next to the creek. And then just up from that is that fen that Jeff mentioned, which is a pretty rare feature in Iowa's landscape anymore, which is essentially a unique wetland type. And then, just up on top of the hill here is one of the spots Jeff's talking about, the CP42 planting. The other one is in your bottom right-hand part of the screen, that field you see there. And so again, an incredible diversity of habitat. So Jeff, you and Nancy have, ever since I met you, been talking about kind of long-term plans, but, I think really trying to figure out what those might look like. Can you maybe start us down the path of what you guys are considering, or what this might look like for you guys long-term, out 20, 30, 40 years or more?
Well, yes, we look outside the box. I mean, yeah, it doesn't do any good to fix this all up and in 20 years, somebody else comes in and farms it, puts cattle in it, or destroys it. You got to think long-term. Jorgen's got ideas for doing that through Practical Farmers and Iowa Heritage, I believe, and we're investigating that. And we're also looking into turning it into a conservatorship and making it an educational place for the future. And if you want this to continue on your ground, you're going to have to start legally making sure it's possible to happen. All this conservation is not year to year. Conservation is like planting a tree. You don't get shade tomorrow. You got to think ahead and do it for the future. So that's what we're looking at, is possibly someday turn this into conservatorship, an educational conservatorship. Because of the diversity in it, we can show a lot of people a lot of different projects.
So Jorgen, would you mind chiming in? You work with a lot of landowners as well on easements and different programs. Maybe you can lead us down some of the common, or at least options that exist for landowners in that realm.
Yeah, I'm actually going to paste a link real quick into the chat, and it's for a website called iowalandoptions.com, or .org, excuse me, iowalandoptions.org. It's a website put together by the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, which is a land trust. So Jeff kind of alluded to some of the things we've been talking about his place, but one of those options for him would be a conservation easement. And so that conservation easement would put, permanent restrictions about what that land could and could not be used for in perpetuity. And so that's just one strategy that a landowner might use to kind of ensure that their vision for that property and the work they put into that property is gonna be maintained even after they no longer own it.
And there's incentives for doing this.
Yeah, there are both some state and federal tax incentives for conservation easements, and those vary pretty greatly depending on your property. And if you don't live in Iowa, then the tax incentives are obviously going to be different. So but that Iowa Land Options website will kind of walk you through all the different things. And I will paste in just a minute here an article that we wrote about some of our members who have pursued conservation easements, and you can read that as well and get some of their stories. But I'm happy to answer questions about conservation easements if there are any. Do we have anything else, Jeff and Darrick? Oh yeah, some resources here. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, I just thought I'd share there, again, we got limited time here, so I'm sure there's lots of detailed type of questions that exist for each individual landowner, but a couple of things you might find helpful. If you just search in Google or any other search engine for that matter, Wildlife Habitat Program and Consultation, you'll get a map like you see on the right-hand side here on a website that's through Iowa State University Extension that allows you to click on a county, any county in Iowa, and come up with a list of biologists, soil and water conservation district staff, DNR staff that handle everything from habitat restoration to depredation and different issues that exist. And so I just really encourage landowners to check that out. Unfortunately, the link is a little bit long, but just search for that and you should find it. Otherwise, my contact information will be at the end, and I'm happy to send it to you as well. And of course, I included our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program link here as well. And if you just search Midwest Partners for Fish and Wildlife, you'll come up with our frequently asked questions and kind of a general info on our program. So the point is there are many, many people out there to assist. It's often a challenge finding out which one is the right person. And I think those two resources, especially the top one, will get you there very quickly. The other links I've included are just information blogs. I think are worth checking out. Are prescribed fire, in general, is something that we need more of on the Iowa landscape, especially in our native habitats, whether it's prairie or oak savanna. And so there's some great videos that the Tallgrass Prairie Center has put together that are free, that you can actually see how to put together everything from burn plans to actually implementing prescribed fire. And Practical Farmers of Iowa, I believe, Jorgen, you also wrote a simple blog on using prescribed burning, which I think is a good resource just to get people thinking about, literally probably the most important strategy for most habitat types on Iowa's landscape would be prescribed fire. And so, it's not going to be done everywhere, but it's something that we'd like to get people thinking about and get people the resources to feel a little more comfortable with, or reach out to people who have that knowledge. And then the last websites I've included or blogs are kind of more tied to the long-term easement information. And I won't read through them, but if you look on the screen there, if you search for any of those things through Practical Farmers of Iowa, Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, Nature Conservancy, or USDA, they all have easement programs or information on different programs that are available in Iowa. And it's something like Jeff was saying, it's, you got to give some serious thought to what you want for the long term of your property, or your property to look like and be preserved as, and they're major decisions. And so, we're not here to say you should do this option or that option, but know that, there are many resources available. And if you have a desire to be in a long-term program, I'm confident there is a program for you, just a matter of finding the right one.
If to get started, I would go to my local NRCS office and ask for their help, and also the Iowa State Extension Office. They will help guide you and get you started. Also, I noticed somebody asked how many acres. In this parcel here, we have about 125 acres that we control, or I should say own and control. Also, somebody asked about the wildlife. When we got here, people started asking us about what we were doing, and we're a little crazy. And I said, well, we got bobcats, and their eyes rolled. And finally, we had to show them the video of a bobcat walking between our machine shed and our house, which is about 50, 60 foot apart. Yes, we hold a lot more wildlife. Some wildlife, such as deer, we have too many, and other ones, such as turkeys, why they're increasing every year.
And that's, I guess I just want to kind of conclude then with some closing points. I think, one thing that we've kind of mentioned, we didn't go into a lot of detail, but to the extent you can, as a landowner, write down your goals. And Jeff and Nancy have been very upfront since the day we met on what their goals are, whether it was the sediment in the creek we talked about and their concerns with that, or wildlife goals. Having those is the reason we're going to do different habitat management techniques, and certainly think about long-term conservation easements with those in mind as well. And so the more you can put that in writing, to me, the better chance that stays with you and subsequent either landowners or family or whoever's going to succeed you in taking over management of the property, versus, not having something in writing and maybe not having that connection with the next managers. And then, questions, Jeff and Nancy are great at finding the right people. Jeff's mentioned NRCS is a great resource, but keep finding the right people and keep asking questions, and just don't give up, because there are answers out there and there's resources available to you. And with that, I would just say that for the Partners Program, we obviously really like having landowners like Jeff and Nancy that are thinking beyond just our 10-year agreements. We still would do a project even if it was just 10 years, but I put in a lot of effort with Jeff and Nancy as well And many of our staff that work for the Partners Program do, because we know that a lot of people have a very large desire to see this last beyond just the next 10 to 20 years. And for those reasons, it's very rewarding, and there is a great amount of financial opportunities that exist to get habitat accomplishments that you want on your property. So I guess, yeah, that's kind of what I had, Jorgen and Jeff. If there's anything you guys want to add or any other questions.
I think let's pause right here real quick, because we are at 5:32, and so if people need to leave, feel free to do so, but we're going to stay on the line here for just a few minutes. When you do sign off, you'll be prompted to take that evaluation, so please fill that out once again. That'll be my final plug to ask you to event survey afterwards. And so, Jeff, we do have a couple more. You beat me to the punch on some of these questions. We have had a couple more come in if you're willing to answer some. So Ruth asked another question: where do you put the spoil? I'm assuming from the oxbow restoration. How was that soil? Was it good for, would it be good for a garden bed?
Excellent. Very good soil, and it's very desirable soil. Where we had our oxbows, it was pretty. So we put the spoils out where the flood zone is. So we just moved it off to the side, but it is something that could be sold.
So I'm gonna maybe turn to Darrick here, because I know there are some permitting issues with what happens to that soil that you remove from the floodplain. So I will, and Darrick, feel free to add to this, but I would check with your NRCS specialist or your Fish and Wildlife Service biologist, or whoever you're working with before you go decide what to do with that soil. But
yeah, I'll just say that most programs I'm aware of, both with Fish and Wildlife Service as well as NRCS, at the end of the day, that soil is, belongs to the landowner. There are permits, like you mentioned, floodplain permits that involve the Iowa DNR and the Army Corps of Engineers. And those mostly just say that the spoils need to come out of the floodplain. And where they go beyond that is often left up to the landowner and the program biologist or engineer they're working with. And so, like Jeff said, anytime there is oxbow spoils, we're talking about, in most cases, that is very rich soil that has a value either on a farm field because it washed in from one, or as being sold for other reasons. Sometimes it can be gravelly and undesirable from that standpoint, but that's something you want to evaluate with the person that's offering you project design help and permitting help.
Yeah. We have a question here from Patrick, and I'm going to broaden his question a little bit, because this is a issue we hear about a lot. And so Patrick asks, one of the challenges I have faced is getting a prescribed burn crew to burn my place in Western Iowa, and there are a few contractors available, and would like to hear if NRCS or anyone else, I would say, has ideas to boost the number of contractors who are able to do this. And I would broaden that even beyond prescribed fire, right? So especially for some of these non-operating landowners who don't have equipment and don't have kind of the wherewithal to do some of this heavy management themselves. Darrick or Jeff, I don't know if you can offer any strategies that might be helpful in finding contractors or finding people who might help with some of those activities.
Well, with us, we do everything we can ourselves, but Darrick had a list of contractors that are used in Iowa. Just like CP42, there's all kinds of people that are willing to do it and take on the responsibility. Just make sure you have that they're accredited.
Yeah, I'll just, what I would say is NRCS is often a good stop. They maintain probably the best contractor list, but I will say that on prescribed fire, I don't believe that list is super long. Depending on where you're at, it can be quite short in terms of who might be willing to do it. And then their availability is a whole nother thing. A couple other ideas I'll throw out there if folks haven't thought of them. Some volunteer fire departments will actually burn. I know a number of landowners that are using that option in Iowa. It's not every volunteer fire department, but there are some that do that and offer that service, either paid or unpaid. Similarly, I've heard some Pheasants Forever groups, local chapters will do prescribed burning. It's certainly worth a conversation to those local chapters to see if they might have the ability to help or know folks that are burning. Trying to think of the other thought I had on that.
when you get the burning, make sure somebody has liability.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to have, what I will, drive home is if you're going to do it yourself or you're having someone else do it, you need a burn plan. That burn plan is going to specify those details that you want to make sure are adhered to in terms of weather conditions and so forth. And again, NRCS, especially if you're in an NRCS program, they will often have staff that can help write those burn plans. So, ask the questions. If you are looking for more specific people in your local area, go ahead and email me if you want or call me, and I'll do my best to put you, get the folks I know. But prescribed fire is one of those things that not every individual is going to be comfortable with. And there often aren't a lot of contractor options. And so finding those avenues wherever we can to get more burning on the landscape is something to consider. The other one I was thinking of real quick is county conservation boards. So sometimes county conservation boards have been willing to help private landowners, especially adjacent ones to their ground, do burning. But also we, Fish and Wildlife Service and Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, have outfitted some conservation boards with burning equipment, so torches, etc., so that equipment at least is available to more landowners. And you coordinate with the local county conservation board. And that creates hopefully a little bit easier mechanism, at least from the equipment side, to do some of the smaller burns. So
NRCS has a book on burning, and it's a very good place to start and gives you ideas on where to go and what to think about.
And Patrick, I just pasted my email into the chat box too, so feel free to reach out, and if you're having trouble, we can get some more information and maybe see if we can find someone to fill that need for you. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I'm gonna ask a question here really quick, and this is a question I get a lot from landowners, and I'll start maybe with Darrick, in that we often do these prairie restorations or kind of these early successional habitat, not to get too technical, but we're trying to kind of freeze this natural process of ecosystem changes in a particular spot, and usually doing that with some sort of disturbance like fire. And that's you're committing to kind of a long-term management approach when you do things like that, Darrick. So I don't know if you can speak to how the necessity for some of that management might change over time, or if it's really every for
I would
however
like
long you want that to be prairie, you're gonna have to
about that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff, if you want to start.
For 50 some years now in California, they didn't allow burning. And that's the importance of burning. I burn around my place every year or every two, because otherwise you start building that up. Also, burning is something that was naturally done on the prairies. It happened all the time. A lot of flowers need to be scarified, and through burning, Darrick can testify that we got rid of a ton of cedar trees this year that would have involved a lot of work, but burning took care of it in a matter of hours. So burning is something that always was done up until about 50 years ago.
yeah, and I think I would just add, burning is a challenge. I mean, I had a small place myself that, and I was just burning a couple acres, and I was nervous myself when I first started doing that. And so there are things to think about. I think from the habitat standpoint, it's important to remember that prairie co-evolved with fire, and fire actually has, created the prairies, or did create the prairies that we had, which were virtually treeless in many areas. And so if there isn't that regime of disturbance, that fire, what we are going to end up with are forests where our prairies were. And that is, why, I guess the most current threat, aside from, the original conversion of our prairies, that we're losing prairie today, is because the trees are coming in, and then that shifts that whole community. So it is somewhat of a long-term, commitment, essentially, to manage prairie habitat, for example, and ideally do it with fire. You really can't replicate fire with mowing or other conventional mechanical type control. But, we also need to find those resources and those people that have that ability to do that fire. And that's kind of where I feel like I come into play in terms of helping landowners find a way to get fire in the landscape if they want to do so. And I think it means a lot, and it says a lot that people are asking about how they can get fire on the landscape, which is critical to maintaining prairie and enhancing it.
And if you're starting a fire and you're not scared, there's something wrong. You better stop. I've never started a fire that I wasn't scared of. Also, the fires work very good for forest. It works very good in the forest too, but you have to be careful. Think of everything you can.
Darrick, there's a question in the chat about how to connect with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in your given area, and specifically in Iowa County. But I'm wondering if Andrew isn't a good point of contact to maybe triage some of those requests as they come in, or how would you recommend people get in touch?
Yep, you see my cell phone there. Anyone can contact me, and if you're not in my primary area, I will make sure to get you in touch with the person that is. Andrew D'Alessandro, who Jorgen just mentioned, is our state coordinator. He's based out of Des Moines area, and he would be the other contact. Jorgen, if you want to add his name to the chat and his email, by all means, and my email for that matter, that might be a good option. But for Fish and Wildlife Service, there is only 3 of us in the entire state of Iowa. Myself, Andrew, and Greg Pattison, who's in the driftless area of eastern Iowa. And so, we do our best to cover as much as we can. But the Fish and Wildlife Service does have focal areas, so strategic areas where we are focusing our attention for these different habitat practices. And if we can't help you, we will certainly get you in contact with other folks, either at NRCS or our nonprofit partners that can help. And so contact me or anyone else that Jorgen adds to that list. Jorgen also can probably put you in contact with some good folks. So.
Yep, I can, happy to help find appropriate wildlife contacts in any given area. So feel free to send me an email. And I will pitch here, Iowa State University has a kind of Find My Biologist tool. So you can enter your county and it'll show you, the Pheasants Forever Farm Bill biologist, the DNR district biologist, the DNR forester, et cetera, in your county. So I'm going to paste that link into the chat as well. I did share Andrew, Darrick, and Greg's emails in the chat, so feel free to reach out to them. And we are about 15 minutes over time, so I think I will cut us off there. Thank you very much, Darrick and Jeff, once again for your time and sharing your experiences and expertise. Thank you, those of you who stuck with us this late and dealt with our reschedule after the derecho. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night.